What if the thing you're most certain about is also the thing most likely to damage your relationships if you don't know what to do with it? Because conviction on its own isn't the problem. It's what we do with our conviction that determines whether it builds something or breaks it.
Mug on the table, rain on the glass, you've been holding your breath, trying to get past the past. Better angels of our nature, sit down, stay a while. We'll name every shadow till it loosens its bite. Better angels of our nature, in the hurt, in the heart, finding room for a softer heart. Right here.
Welcome to Better Angels of Our Nature with Marcie Gourley. So a week or so ago, when I was in Washington, D.C., I was walking along the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. A hot dog vendor called out, "Hot dog, sir," to the gentleman in front of me. "Have a hot dog, you only live once." The gentleman said, "That's right, bro, you only live once." And the lady he was with said, "If I only have one life, then I'm not wasting it eating hot dogs. Neither are you. Let's go." And she attempted to pull her man away from the vendor. And from there, the discussion, partly funny, partly serious, continued about the qualities of and the detriment of hot dogs. Both the man and the woman made valid points. She didn't want to eat foods that would lead to a heart attack, and he said he knew a healthy guy that plopped over with a heart attack, and it didn't matter that he ate clean. This guy wanted a hot dog. His lady wanted her man to live. Both were deeply convicted about their feelings about hot dogs from this vendor, and the vendor was deeply convicted that he wanted to make some cash. So, who was right? I bet you have an opinion. Maybe you even just said it out loud. You might have a conviction about this matter, a very strong one. You may have also figured out that today we're going to talk about something we all have. So grab some coffee, make yourself comfortable, and join me today as we talk about conviction. Conviction itself is not the problem. In fact, conviction is necessary. It anchors us. It gives us clarity. It helps us make sense of what matters in a complicated world. Without conviction, we drift. Without conviction, we become passive. Without conviction, we lose our ability to stand for anything meaningful. But something happens when conviction loses its anchor. When conviction separates from humility, it begins to shift. It moves from something that guides us to something that hardens us. And eventually, if we're not careful, it becomes something we use against others rather than something that forms us. Conviction, at its best, says, "This matters to me." But when it shifts, it begins to say, "I'm right," and then "they're wrong," and eventually, "they're the problem." That progression happens quickly. It rarely feels dramatic in the moment. In fact, it often feels justified. It feels like clarity. It feels like strength, but over time, it narrows us. It reduces our curiosity. It flattens complexity. It turns people into positions and conversations into battlegrounds. Something deeply human is lost. We stop listening to understand and we begin listening to confirm. And confirmation, over time, becomes its own kind of addiction. Because there's a neurological reason for that. When we express moral outrage, when we react strongly to something we believe is wrong, our brains release dopamine. It's the same reward chemical associated with reinforcement. We feel validated. We feel aligned. We feel, in a strange way, powerful. And when others agree with us, that reward deepens. So the brain begins to learn something. Certainly feels good. Indignation feels powerful. Agreement feels safe. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, we begin to build a loop. Stronger reactions lead to more validation, and more validation leads to stronger certainty. And stronger certainty reduces our willingness to question ourselves or to ask questions of others. It feels like clarity, but often it's contraction. And underneath that contraction, something deeper is happening. It's almost as if over time we drift back toward an emotional baseline, a kind of internal homeostasis. And sometimes that baseline becomes fear. Not always loud fear, not panic, but a steady underlying sense that something is wrong, that something is threatening, that something must be addressed, corrected, confronted. And when fear becomes the baseline, everything gets filtered through it. I'm going to say that again. When fear becomes the baseline, everything gets filtered through it. Conviction intensifies. Nuance disappears. People become categories. We begin not to see individuals but sides, not complexity but threat. We miss out on humanity and find opposition. And something even deeper is lost. We lose the ability to see the image of God in one another, the quiet imprint of dignity, the inherent worth that exists before agreement, the reality that every person carries a story, a struggle, a history we can't see at first glance. Maybe they're struggling in a spiritual battle. Maybe they had trauma we don't know about that led them to the stance they're taking now. Maybe there's something in them that, if approached with love instead of fear, would lead to lasting, powerful change. But often, instead of love, we approach these differences with fear. Fear reduces people to positions, but people were never meant to be reduced. When fear leads, we stop seeing faces and start seeing labels. We stop encountering people and we start evaluating. We stop recognizing something sacred and start defending something personal. And once that shift happens, it becomes easier to dismiss, to dehumanize, to speak with sharpness we would never use in the presence of someone we truly see. But when we remember, even briefly, that the person in front of us bears the fingerprint of God, it slows us down, it softens our tone, it reintroduces restraint, not because we abandon conviction, but because we recover reverence, and that changes everything. This is not new. In fact, if we look carefully at history, we see this pattern repeated again and again, not because people lacked intelligence and not because they lacked values, but because conviction became untethered from humility and fear was allowed to take the lead. In 1692, during the Salem Witch Trials, a community became convinced that evil was present among them. That belief in itself was actually not the issue. The issue was what followed. Fear spread quickly. Ordinary behavior was reinterpreted as evidence. Accusations multiplied, and once accusation took hold, it became dangerous to question it. Many believed they were protecting their community. Many believed they were acting righteously. But suspicion replaced discernment, and neighbors became threats. Eventually, the hysteria subsided. Evidence was re-examined, wrongful accusations were acknowledged, but not before lives were lost and trust was fractured. Years later, during the French and Indian War, propaganda shaped perception in a different way. The other side was not simply portrayed as wrong, but as dangerous, less human, something to be feared and resisted at all cost. Complex realities were reduced to simple narratives, and when we simplify people into categories, it becomes easier to justify how we treat them. Over time, those narratives were revisited. History became more nuanced and the humanity of all sides became clearer, but only after division had already deepened. And again, then in the 1950s, during McCarthyism, fear of hidden threats resurfaced again. Americans were warned that dangerous ideologies had infiltrated institutions. Accusations spread again. Evidence became less important than suspicion. And in some cases, defending yourself was interpreted as guilt. Careers were destroyed, reputations dismantled, and again, many believed they were doing the right thing. Eventually, the process itself came under scrutiny, and the lack of evidence was exposed. The methods were questioned, and the cultural moment shifted, but not before significant harm had been done. In each of these moments, the pattern is strikingly similar. Fear rises, conviction intensifies, complexity collapses, people become categories, and accusation spreads faster than truth. And in each case, truth does reemerge, always does, but often slowly and often after damage. Because when conviction becomes a weapon, it doesn't just distort reality, it delays truth. And that is not just in history, that is human nature. That is what happens when fear becomes the baseline and we stop interrupting it. So the question becomes, how do we get unstuck? Not just as a culture, but as individuals. Because while we can't control the entire system, we are not powerless within it. We begin recognizing something simple but profound. You cannot think your way out of fear if your body is still in it. When your nervous system is activated, your brain shifts into protection mode. Your ability to access nuance, empathy, and long-term reasoning decreases. Everything feels more urgent, more certain, more absolute. So the first step is not argument, it's regulation. A slow breath, a pause before responding, a decision not to react immediately. We interrupt fear physiologically before we challenge it intellectually. From there, we introduce complexity. Fear simplifies. Truth expands. We ask questions that reopen perspective. Like, what might I be missing? What would someone on the other side say? Is this the whole picture? Asking those questions, that's not weakness. That's disciplined thinking. That's when we rehumanize, because fear divides, but humanity reconnects. And the truth is, most Americans have far more in common than what we're being shown. We want safety. We want meaning. We want our families to be well. We want to live with dignity. Those shared desires do not disappear just because we disagree. So we take one small step, one conversation where we listen instead of correct, one moment where we ask instead of assume. We do not have to agree to remain human. And then we choose our posture. Conviction should guide us, but it was never meant to harden us. We can hold strong beliefs without losing gentleness, without losing patience, without losing self-control, because ultimately the question is not just what we believe. It's what our beliefs are producing inside of us. Are they producing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? These are not fragile qualities. They are strong ones. They are what remain when conviction is refined rather than weaponized. Scripture reminds us that the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. That is not a dismissal of conviction. It is a warning about posture. Because anger may feel powerful, but it rarely produces what we actually long for. And the same is true here. If our conviction is not producing fruit, it is producing hardness in our hearts. And hardness always feels justified. But it does not build. It does not heal. It does not sustain. So we return again to a quieter truth. We don't get unstuck from fear all at once. We do it gradually. One steady breath, one clarified thought, one humanizing interaction at a time. History shows us that we are capable of drifting into fear, but it also shows us that we are capable of returning to truth. When we reintroduce what fear removes, evidence, complexity, humanity, and perhaps most importantly, each other, we begin to rehumanize, because fear divides, but humanity reconnects. And remember, the truth is, most Americans have far more in common than what we are being shown. We want safety, meaning, and our families to be well, dignity, but beyond that, we begin to remember something deeper, that the person in front of us is not just a position to evaluate, but a life that carries weight, a story we don't fully know, a person, whether we agree with them or not, who still bears the fingerprints of God. And when we remember that, even imperfectly, something shifts. Our tone softens, our urgency slows, our words become more careful, not because we're weak, but because we are seeing clearly again. Conviction should guide us. It was never meant to divide us. And when we learn to carry it with humility, something begins to shift. We remain clear without becoming cold. We remain strong without becoming harsh. We remain convicted without becoming unrecognizable. That is strength. That is refinement. That is how better angels are formed. So this week, pay attention, not just to what you believe, but to what your beliefs are producing in you. And choose, even in small ways, to let them produce something good. Let's hold steady and call our better angels forward. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe or comment. And if you want the PDF of the notes for the show, you head on over to www.marciegourley.com. And don't forget, on April 21st, my book, 250 Great Things About America, will debut. You can find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever you find great books. Thanks for watching. There's a good chance there's someone in your life, someone you care about deeply, and lately something has shifted. Not necessarily the love, but the ease. What used to feel natural now feels tense. What used to feel safe now feels uncertain.